the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you are answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
Thanks, everybody. I was talking a little bit before we started that I had actually planned for an hour and a half talk, so if I go quickly at any point, forgive me. Basic outline, going to get a little bit of sustainability context so that we were speaking about sustainability from the same page. I do many talks, and I promise you that no matter how many times we introduce sustainability, something will come up that'll allow us to not talk past each other. One of the things that I use to put into context the way I've approached sustainability strategies is a systems thinking mindset. So I'm going to talk a little bit about systems thinking and how I've tried to adapt systems thinking into a sustainability strategic framework. And then I'm going to run you through this sustainability progressive strategy framework. And you all are the first audience to hear me actually present this because we just finished writing our book, which is the second edition of the Sustainable Enterprise Field Book. And what you're seeing is essentially the strategy chapter of that book. So I'm going to spend a few minutes, again, just getting the groundwork set here, because you as students and as people that are trying to become the actual future of sustainability, I think it's really important for you to come into the field of sustainability and sustainable management with the mindset that we really have no idea what the future is going to be. And, some people look at sustainability and it gets quite dark and gloomy because there's a lot of risky and not so good things happening in the world. And then other people, everything's kind of glorious and they're basically in denial about reality. So the news that I want to say is that the future is not predestined, and that we all, by jumping in and doing good work, we have the ability to create a future that we want for ourselves. And so when I think of sustainability, and I've been in the field now for over 25 years, it's really not an end game. You're not trying to go from being unsustainable and all of a sudden one day we're going to all be sustainable and the battle's over. Unfortunately, this is a marathon. It's a never-ending journey. And this journey, we are really just at the beginning of the journey, even though, people have been working on this since, the early 1900s even, but we're still at really this kind of pre-awareness state where most of the average people on the planet are unaware of their condition, of their living conditions and the state of the world. So they're in that pre-awareness state. You all, after this talk today, will be I'll just say at an awareness state, which is wonderful. But in order to go from awareness into action and action into impacts, we've got to keep going. And right now, a lot of work is being done that is about continuous improvement to get to sustainability. But I think we're a little bit too late for continuous improvement to get us there. And we're going to really need some more radical, transformative change. I'd ask you to stop me at any point while I'm talking, ask questions. the end, we could run out of time or whatever. So sustainability is a journey. We're co-creating the solutions together. I don't have answers to everything, so I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and work with you guys as the next generation of innovators to try and create better systems and hopefully some transformational solutions. A lot of you want to know a little bit about the career side. How did I get to be standing in front of you? How did I get to be a professor of green accounting? I started as an engineer. I did hazardous waste site investigations. I went to night school, got my MBA, and then all of a sudden I followed my career up the pipe. I started to do pollution prevention. I ended up doing from pollution prevention to the work with PricewaterhouseCoopers, where I was helping them to start what was originally an environmental practice for an accounting firm. So what did they care about? When I started in 1992, the accounting firm cared about litigation risk. So I was doing hazardous waste site litigation, expert witness testimony. And then all of a sudden I started to work with the insurance industry because they were getting a lot of claims for these hazardous waste sites and environmental damages. So I started to work on that side of business strategy and risk management. And then I ultimately got involved in the metric side. How are we measuring sustainability and the creation of things like ERP systems that could actually collect the data necessary to start asking, how is the company performing sustainably? Went on to be a software development president of Ecos Technologies, doing the consulting with transitioning to green, and also the teaching. I bring to all of this also the fact that I'm a father. So because this is a long-term issue and I have children, I really care about, it may not happen in my lifetime, I hope not, but it definitely looks like things are going to really be shaken up in the lifetime of my children. In terms of careers, my view on this from your standpoint as careers, I know many of you are sustainability management curriculum people. That's a nice generalist career. Maybe you can be a chief sustainability officer, which is a fantastic role inside of a company. I often teach to MBA programs for the people that are trying to, yes, be sustainability managers, but they're also caring about it more from the business case and the financial systems perspective. I would argue that no matter what your undergraduate degree is, every single job, every single degree, every single career has an opportunity to integrate sustainability into it and therefore have a better impact on the company that you're working for. So you're going to be more valuable as employees if you can understand the lens of sustainability. Now this is when I'm going to go really fast because you said if I say triple bottom line, I can go fast, right? So quick history, right? In the 1980s, we're looking at the Brundtland Commission, and the language at that time was sustainable development, all right? And the United Nations was worried about, developing countries that were trying to raise up their economies. And the challenge and the language was, we need to be able to meet the needs of this present generation without jeopardizing the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. That's tough to process and tough to actualize. So other people came after that definition and they started to change their own language because nobody was getting excited. Nobody was jumping on the journey to be sustainable. So John Ehrenfeld is one of the people who was one of the founders of concepts like industrial ecology, and he wrote a book called Flourishing. And the idea of flourishing is really an economy that is a regenerative economy. And the more you consume something, the better and better the planet will become. So that's a great aspirational idea. Again, how are we going to put it into practice? We don't know. But at least what we're doing is creating a language that more people will embrace, and they won't just shut down their thinking and learning because of the doom and gloom side of the other language and conversations. So here's my triple bottom line slide. Skip, right? You guys understand it. We can attack sustainability in what we worry about but we talk about as the silos of the people, the planet, the profits, the economics, the social equity, and the environment. All right, what am I doing here? All right, so the business people cared about the finance, right? They wanted to know about their share price risk, and they wanted to know about business value. And so that took the triple bottom line and it kind of worked it into its own language, which we talk about as ESG, or the environmental, social, and governance elements of a sustainable company. So now we're kind of shifting the language so that it will be more relevant to corporations. And then as we try to implement sustainability from that triple bottom line perspective and using that language of ESG, even that wasn't really getting to the nuance of sustainability. And so we went a little bit broader, and we now talk about it in terms of managing assets or managing multi-capitals. So the latest trend of sustainability accounting is multi-capital accounting and integrated reporting. So these concepts are the bleeding edge now of most of corporate America. And then we have the intersection with society. And so I know Amanda, for example, working with Secaucus, what happens when you're trying to implement sustainability for a community or for a nation? And in that case, the triple bottom line looks more about trying to attain a higher quality of life, better well-being for the people in the entire community. And they do that through economic, environmental, and social means. And we now talk about economic progress, not in terms of just economic growth, but genuine progress and growth in not just the economy, but in the well-being of the public. My clicker seems to be running out here. So I mentioned I'm kind of shift a little bit towards the system thinking element of sustainability. And when we're thinking about it from a systems perspective, it can still, I'll show you a few slides, that it can still be triple bottom line, but now I want you to be thinking about each of those words as systems. And we only really, when we start from the holistic perspective, we only have one planet. And so a holistic planetary system is the one that I'm going to have to try to manage towards. But then we also have to worry about social justice. So how are we going to get there? Are we going to get there fairly across all nations and all people? Or are there going to be winners and losers? You know, are the 1% going to be able to live sustainably in some guarded community? Or will it be enough resources for everyone? And then when we talked about the resources, we have the resources of the people on the planet today, the 7.5 billion of us, or are we going to have the resources for maybe the 8 or 9 billion people that are going to be on the planet in just the next 10 or 15 years? So that intergenerational thinking has to come into our strategies. Okay, there we go. So this was the idea. A lot of you that have been thinking about the triple bottom line, right? This is a little bit of a different way of saying the same thing, because we don't see the triple bottom line as being one that's trade-offs, okay, where you're trying to balance between business, society, and the environment. We see these as nested and interdependent systems. So you're not going to be able to have a sustainable business if you don't also have a sustainable society. And then if you don't have, you can't have a sustainable society without having a sustainable environment and planet. In the early days, the idea was business is the problem. So business is causing pollution, which is hurting society, and then our consumption as society is hurting the environment. But now, today, business has gotten more mature, and we understand that it's actually, business has to exist even with the impacts of society affecting the business's operations now, and the impacts of the planet are affecting the business. So now you've got all of these types of business risks. This is a slide of the World Economic Forum, and it's this is the 2018 most likely risks to business and the probability that they're going to occur. So that upper right-hand corner of extreme weather events, that was determined to be the highest risk to business with the highest probability that it's going to occur. So it's when we say risk, the impact on business, okay? And it's colored green there because that happens to be an environmental risk, and the other colors can represent social risks or governance risks or technology risks. So this was not developed by environmentalists or tree huggers. This risk profile was created for the CEOs of the corporations. And that's really important when we're trying to get CEOs and corporations to embrace sustainability within their corporate strategies. So as I'm now trying to apply systems thinking and those three big systems, right? We have the environmental system, we have all of our different social systems and forms of government, and we have our economic systems. So all of them have similar characteristics. So the major system characteristics that I now tried to apply to different corporate strategies was I tried to look at the different corporate strategies, and for each one, I had to determine what was the function or what was the purpose of that system, okay? So that is, every system has a purpose. Why does it exist? Why did it form? Then I wanted to understand what were the resource flows associated with that particular system. Once I understood the resource flows, I also have to put those resource flows into some kind of a time context, right? Am I talking about the stock market today? Am I talking about the next quarterly report? Am I talking about a whole year, which is like an eternity to a business person? And in fact, we're talking about 5-year strategies for corporations. Maybe the United Nations is now working on their 2030 strategy, so that's 12 more years with that strategy. And when we're talking about climate change, we're generally talking about 2050. So we're talking about mashing together time frames into a single progressive strategy mindset. So all of those boundaries and the interconnectedness of systems. So every system I could create is interconnected with every other system. And that's a really important fundamental understanding. Every system has mental models. We all have assumptions, right? So we believe that if we're going to invest a certain way, that we're going to get a certain return. We believe our economic system today has an assumption that there's a thing called economic growth. So these are man-made assumptions that formed the rules of the system, okay? And then the last part of it is networks. What are the networks and the interconnections, and how do we make that system operate, okay? And one of the things that is going to be necessary for a sustainable business strategy is to be able to collaborate with your stakeholders, with your employees, and certainly with the entire value chain that you're working within. So now the skill that we're trying to embrace with this new strategic mindset is what we call integrated thinking. So it's not just thinking in your discipline, but you also have to be able to think and put yourself in the shoes of your colleagues in other disciplines. So you can't be thinking about sales alone or finance alone. It has to be finance in the context of your value chain or your customer. And so this is a really, it's emergent, and it's actually quite new to get the emphasis on taking sustainability and making that a lens and a mindset through which every function of the enterprise can see how they fit together. Any questions? I think I'm doing right on time now. I kind of did a little bit of fast talking there, but this, believe it or not, this kind of cheesy little figure was the best I could do to come up with this quite innovative, I believe, innovative way of communicating a progressive bridge, or bridges in my case, to get from the vast amount of where corporate America is today, or where business people are, where anybody who's trying to get a job and subsist is, which is over there in that very large stuck box. Okay, they haven't even begun the journey. And then we need to cross what I call chasms, okay? And the first chasm is one of awareness, because people, if they don't know where they are, then they won't know to get on this journey to get to just getting started with their sustainability strategy. And I call the people that are just getting started, they're just doing something, right? And then they have to move progressively from just doing something to trying to actually make a profit and sustain themselves as a company. And so that I call doing well. And I'm going to get into these in a little bit more detail next. But as we move from just doing things to doing well, I promise you what we're actually doing is we're muddling ourselves through this, right? We don't know which of our strategies are going to work and which ones aren't going to work. And so we're going to have what we call system fixes that actually fail. And they have unintended consequences. That's a big element of systems thinking, is to get people to start proactively asking questions about what might go wrong if our idea actually works, right? And then we also then have to move even further from just doing well financially or sustaining ourselves, because if we're all just sustaining ourselves, the trend right now is that we're still going to be unsustainable in the long term. Societal systems aren't working. So I'm going to eventually move you, progress you to strategies that are what we call doing well and doing good, and then ultimately to strategies that are thriving. And believe it or not, thriving strategies, we don't know what they are right now. We have a few companies, which I can talk about, that are just beginning to take on a strategic context of saying that we're going to try to be a flourishing company. We're going to try to get to science-based goals, for example. But nobody is there yet, okay? So I told you I had my background in metrics and green accounting. And so as we start to apply a strategy for any company, we have to put that strategy into a context. And so this little diagram is really an enterprise system diagram that if you apply it properly, you can actually see what you're doing today and where you're going to progress to until you get to an actual holistic management system or a holistic performance measure that actually can tell us, are we operating sustainably or not? Okay? So just as an example, a company that's just beginning the journey, am I going to ask them to understand their impact across their entire value chain? That's unlikely going to happen, right? So when I work with just a beginning company, I might focus that axis about the value chain to their own operations. That's a place where a lot of people can grasp and get started assessing their sustainable performance. And then as they grow in their awareness and grow hopefully with some successes, then they can start to look at their suppliers or look at their customers and expand that value chain into a more holistic system that their operations operate within, right? And then as we start to address what risk are we trying to manage, right? A lot of companies will start with the risks associated with, let's say, their hazardous wastes or their material sourcing. And that could be in the environmental materials and energy side of the operations. But then, as we say, triple bottom line, right? We got to deal with the people side of it. What are they doing with their employees? How are their products in helping the well-being of their customers? So that's an expansion of the systems. And then also, how is it all fitting into the value chain finances and the economics, right? So this is a framework that can actually handle any scale of any system. And so ultimately, we're trying to get to this circular economy mindset. And this just happens to be one example of that framework using a 6 capitals lens. And this is the one that's now being promoted by the integrated reporting standards. And what they're trying to do now is use multi-capitalism and reduce the overwhelming number of indicators to what they call the key performance indicators and the risks that are the ones that are most material to a business. And in the integrated reporting scheme, they blatantly say, when they say the word risk, that they're talking about material financial risks, okay? Did I lose anybody? Are we following along here okay? See, so I'm a little bit of... Feel free to ask me some questions if I'm speaking too fast or kind of covering a lot of things. So here's one of the issues that are causing governments and businesses and now even people to be stuck in that beginning stage. And that's because our economy is dependent upon economic growth in order to justify the financial capital that it needs to invest in all of the different either business opportunities or solving societal problems. And historically, everyone was expecting that sustainability problems were going to be solved by who? What stakeholder was everybody waiting for to solve societal problems? The government, right? And the government only had enough financial means that they could get through collecting taxes. So with that as a comment, how many of you want to pay more taxes? Everybody, today's happens to be tax filing day, right? We were all doing our best to find every loophole we could to pay the least amount of taxes. And so that game of, the government needing capital to try to invest in better societies and better economies, it is not happening, all right? And when we try to use the economy as a future cast of how to get to a sustainable world, we start to say, gee, we can get there if only there was 7% economic growth, right? But the fact is, economic growth is actually declining now. We're hitting the limits of our current economic growth, and we've actually been going through some periods where there's even been negative interest rates on bonds, for example, in order to get those bonds out into the economy, because there's no demand anymore. So this issue of shifting our economic mindset away from one that's dependent upon growth has to be an economic mindset shift, a big shift in the entire economic system, okay?
That's the Chasm curve, right? It says like there's a relationship between environmental degradation and economic increase.
Right.
So, I mean, you could see that like if you looked at all the companies that are investing in clean energy and in infrastructure, there's a lot of efforts in sustainability right now, and you can see on the curve that the economy is degrading. But all the damage that's been done to the environment has been over the course of a century during, economic rise.
Right. So now we have two bad things that are now, both the environmental system is showing that it's not working, right. And, well, actually, that's a good lead into my next slide. Okay. So we have now this growth model as our economy, and it's what most of us think about when we're trying to assess our own personal values, right? Am I going to value that electric car over my compact car, combustion engine compact car, right? It's basically, can I afford the Tesla, right? I'd love to be able to afford a Tesla, but I have to make economic decisions. I would love to take a job as a teacher working in a school, but I want to make a lot of money so I can, sustain some lifestyle. So this economy and how it issues values and how it rewards through compensation different jobs, it's not working. It's not working. So these are the outcomes that we're getting from a growth-dependent economy, right? We're getting unaccounted for environmental damage from our economic consumption. And that's quantified in ecosystem services, and we could have a longer conversation about that. But we do know that in China, for example, for every dollar of GDP that they generate, it's actually costing them $4 in natural capital costs. So you're actually kind of in a net negative $3. And what are they trying to do? They're trying to stimulate faster and faster economic growth, which is just going to cause faster and faster environmental demise for that nation. So we got to get these systems back into alignment. Yeah?
Just a quick clarification. You say the natural capital, are you actually like assigning a dollar value to a natural resource?
Yes, in that particular model, it's using assumptions to assign a value to the ecosystem services and the natural capital that's being consumed and in some cases declining from that economic use. Yeah. So now I'm going to kind of just walk us through the journey. I'm still okay. I'm going to stop 45 or so, 15 more minutes maybe, and then we'll try and have a little dialogue about this. But when I talk about the journey, I'm trying not to be pessimistic, but when I say that we're just at the beginning of this journey, the first thing I started to look at was, and only from a corporate, so now I'm going to create my system for this doing category. How many companies do I need to move from being stuck to just acknowledging and being aware of sustainability? And most of that is the small and independent companies, right? So, we have millions and millions of small companies that are actually the microbes, if you will, of our economy today. And that idea of independent consultants, 1099 employees, Uber drivers, right? That's the new business model that seems to be emerging. So the idea that you'd go to work for one company and have a job for life, that just doesn't exist anymore. So we need to have a journey and a strategy that can work for small businesses. And small businesses in this category is less than 500 people, okay? Down to the individual entrepreneur or self-employed person. Also within this doing category is a very important group of innovators, and that's the startup company. So how many of you imagine when you finish sustainability management or your engineering degrees that you'd like, or imagine yourself either starting your own company or working for a startup company? A few. Well, guess what? If there aren't any jobs coming out of those large companies, then the next thing is start your own company, right? But and for those that are trying to create a new innovation, this just happens to be one of the tools that I promote to help a company that's just getting started to create a good strategy. And this one came from a book by Jeffrey Moore called Crossing the Chasm. And it was also where I got my own language and thinking about this was a startup strategy for tech companies. So you get from that early innovation and idea, but how do they cross the chasm over and break into the mainstream market, right? So we have that same issue going on in the clean tech industry, which is all of these technologies that have already been invented that have the possibility of solving some big societal or environmental problem. So we'll just use solar power as an example of that, right? So you have the technology innovation that's happening, and we're getting better and better at the efficiency of converting sunlight into energy, but it's not yet mainstream. So there's chasms to be crossed, and the biggest message here from a crossing the chasm strategy perspective is to try to get ahead of the people that are willing to be your early adopters and try to think about a more holistic product so that it will be easier to understand and use by the customers. So this is a very customer-centric strategy, and I think that every sustainable innovation needs to first and foremost be a customer-centric innovation so that we can begin to express its value proposition to the customer in a very clear way. So now we have all of the supposedly startup companies. And by the way, if you're a startup company, my advice is not to go further and further into debt and take on more venture capital, my advice to startup companies is find a path to profitability. If you're profitable, then you can sustain yourself as you're trying to find new partnerships, as you're trying to get that next tranche of investor capital. So my example in the book of a company that's actually hugely innovative, but we're not sure if it's going to make it yet, is Tesla, right? He's trying to disrupt like 12 different industries simultaneously, Elon Musk, right? But he's not profitable. And unfortunately, I love all of his innovations. I love the way he speaks. His vision for the future is one that I want to embrace, right? His investors want to embrace it also. He's more capitalized. Tesla's got more market capitalization than General Motors. But it's not going to stay there because the investment community is impatient. So every time he made a joke, did everybody see his social media joke about Tesla going bankrupt on April Fool's Day? Bad joke, right? A lot of people believed him because it's precarious whether or not they're going to stick with him, all right? So until he gets to profitability, then he's at risk of going bankrupt. And the capital markets are fickle. They can pull all that capital in a day. So there's no guarantee that he's going to have the right to exist until he gets to his own self-sufficiency, and that requires, today, profitability. So now we're talking about profitable companies, and this is where the vast majority of what I would call public companies are today. So how many companies is that, right? We talked about the fact that there's 25 million companies. I think that might have been just in the United States alone, right? So globally, we're talking about millions upon millions of companies. How many companies are actually publicly traded? And so they're in this position of acting with the capital markets to progress their own sustainable strategies, right? So right now, the whole universe is about 630,000 companies out of the tens of millions of companies that exist, right? So now we've whittled it down. But these are at least companies that are profitable, but their license to operate should not be in perpetuity. So in my thinking and in my strategy, I allow a profitable company maybe 5 years of enhancing their profit before I start to ask them, are you just in this only for profit, or are you going to actually have a vision and a purpose that can get you beyond maximizing shareholder value as your only reason for being, or to make myself individually a rich person, okay? So the idea of doing well is important, but we need to build up sufficient reserves so that we can take more risks later to do well and do good. So what are the strategies to just use sustainability as a lens so that I can do well, right? So a lot of CEOs are doing sustainability because they just believe it in their gut to be the right thing, or they've had some brand issue. So they try to minimize the risks of brand risks. There's also a lot of just wasteful operational processes, and if they apply a sustainability lens to their human resources and their material resources and their business models, they can make a lot more profit. So that's the good news, right? And so every company that only wants to do sustainability for the purpose of doing well can actually do well, and do well better by using sustainability as their lens. And this is I speak a lot about profitability modeling, and the idea of creating a sustainable, profitable model is to take those global risks that we showed earlier and then say, how are those risks impacting my business? That was that boomerang approach, and then converting that into discrete opportunities and risks, or carrots and sticks as we like to talk about them. And in general, in a 3 to 5 year period, a company can improve their profitability by almost doubling it, 100% improvement in 3 to 5 years. Those are the kind of benchmarks that I work with my clients. And that works for small companies as well as large companies. And this is the business model that was put out by the Principles of Responsible Investing. And again, it's just a way of framing strategies that are going to do well. And it's even, this particular report also had statistics and benchmarks about how companies that were embracing sustainability were having higher returns on equity. They were having higher market capitalization rates. They were having better productivity of their employees. They were having better market growth. So in every facet of the business model, sustainable companies are outperforming those that have not yet understood and embraced sustainability. But unfortunately, not enough. Because if we're only all doing well financially, as we talked about earlier, the natural capital is declining, societal systems are declining, we're doomed. So now we have to change our business strategy. After building up a little bit of a buffer, we need to start taking risks and changing, shifting, pivoting our purpose to one that's doing well and doing good. All right? Try and tell that to CEOs that are under enormous stress just to perform in the stock markets or just to deliver their profits, right? So this particular strategy evolved from the people that understood sustainability, but initially it was doing well by doing good. Okay? It's a little subtle shift because doing well by doing good is actually just doing well. They were just seeing the market opportunities that sustainability had, pursuing them, which was very smart, but for the purpose, not for the purpose of changing the larger system they were working within. They were working within that system. They liked the system that they're working within, and they saw it as a strategic advantage. So this idea now of doing well and doing good, these are the people that are now trying to change the game, those large systems that we were talking about. They have to advocate for system change at all levels. One of the strategy frameworks that I've embraced was developed by Andrew Winston, and it's called the Big Pivot. And he outlines the different larger system elements that notice another language shift here. He doesn't talk about a company as being sustainable anymore. Now he's talking about companies that are resilient. They're going to be able to withstand the volatility of the environmental things that are happening in the world, and they're going to be able to withstand social unrest, and they're going to be able to withstand volatility in the economic markets. Okay? So that's now a resilient company is a sustainable company in this particular framework. And the things that they're trying to work on are changing their behaviors around partnering. Okay? So partnering, they want to do massive collaboration now to get to more efficient value chains. They need to now collaborate with the government. They have to become lobbyists because we know that government has shown that they don't have the will to change government and law towards a better system. So business is now becoming involved in politics. And they need to, not just from a policy development standpoint, but also from the will. We have to find politicians with the will to get behind this pivot and shift in strategy. We have to change our vision, right? We talked a lot about short-sightedness, because if we're only thinking about how this is going to work in the next 1 year, that's going to lead to unintended consequences 5 years down the road or 15 years down the road. So we have to take the long term and then walk that back to what do I need to do tomorrow? And the valuation pivot, which we've talked about. We need to change the economy. And a lot of that is going to be through integrating natural capital into our understanding of the costs and benefits of the business and the services that the business is providing. This year, January 16th, was a pivotal moment in the shift in the capital markets to doing well and doing good. And that was Larry Fink issuing a letter to all of his stakeholders, okay? And it was now saying that as an investment management company, he manages $6 trillion of investment capital. And he's now partnered with other investment firms that collectively are managing over $30 trillion of investment capital. And they're now asking their investment holdings to not just report to them on their strategy of how they're going to do well, but how they're going to do both well and do good for society. So that is a major carrot for those companies that are ready now to take the risk of being more than just profitable, but now how am I going to shift my purpose to help society? That was January 16th. So that's pretty recent, right? A couple months ago. To be honest with you, Larry Fink is known. He's been putting out these pretty ambitious investor letters for about 4 years now. So some people will dismiss it and say it'll never happen. But every year now there's $30 trillion that are backing it. So I'm seeing momentum in this shift in the capital markets. So how can we say what is doing good? And along comes the United Nations, and they worked collaboratively with society, and they came up with these 17 Sustainable Development Goals. So when I'm consulting to my clients, we can start to try to align their doing well and doing good strategy, and they can start asking themselves, is there something that I'm doing that's either a carrot and it's positively influencing one or more of these Sustainable Development Goals, or am I part of the problem? Is my business one of the sticks that's causing a negative outcome in any of these Sustainable Development Goals? And so there are strategic tools now for assessing your company strategy against the various Sustainable Development Goals. There was also another group that was formed, and they said these Sustainable Development Goals are not going to get accomplished by government. They have to be accomplished by the private sector. And so they created the Sustainable Development Commission and started to say, hey, look, businesses, nations, the Sustainable Development Goals are in fact a big opportunity. And they're saying that $12 trillion, am I right? $12 trillion of the next phases of economic growth are going to come by creating solutions to the Sustainable Development Goals. It's also going to create jobs for 380 million people. Again, these are just round numbers, but it's now incentivizing nations and corporations to embrace the Sustainable Development Goals and help attain those outcomes for society. And again, it broke it down by specific silos of industries, so specific value chains. So the largest one, hey, talked about those electric vehicles. How about that shift to self-driving cars, right? They're saying that mobility systems is one of the biggest industries that's going to be able to benefit by this capitalization shift, by this consumer demand shift towards this and towards the Sustainable Development Goals. So this just gives you an idea, a little menu. If you're in any of these industries, the opportunity is waiting for you. So then I'm going to end with the ultimate sustainable strategy, which is getting to that flourishing company and thriving. All right, so these are companies that are now setting their goals to match science and science-based targets. This is the donut economy, okay? The donut economy is our targets that we've already set, and the outer rim of the donut economy are for what we call planetary boundaries, all right? So if any one of those planetary boundary systems is beyond its own carrying capacity, we're at risk of becoming extinct as a species. So this is a man-made risk profile that says we can't exceed an environmental limit, and we don't want society to fail. So the inner workings of the donut economy are for societal goals. that we want to set floors for. If you go below a floor of a societal goal, we need to work on that and bring it back up. And there are groups that are actually creating the system frameworks for science-based targets and societal-based norms, okay? This happens to be a system model developed by Herman Daly way back in the 1980s, and it's called the Daly Triangle, but it actually shows you how those 6 capitals and the purposes of businesses can be framed in order to move us from allocating our natural capital, which is the ultimate means of everything that we do, and then we could start to measure our outcomes so that we're ultimately affecting the ultimate outcome, which is the well-being for all consumers and all people on the planet. So one of those business models is the Future Fit business model. And another one is in that reporting context. It's called the Reporting 3.0 initiative. But as you can see, we're right here at the bleeding edge because the Reporting 3.0 business blueprints, they're not even fully out yet. They come out in June of 2018. So you're getting all of this insight. You can look up all of these websites, and there'll be a lot more detail to come. And I have 9 minutes for questions.